And with that, I am assuming Karen is on. I can't see everybody, but I'm so excited. Oh, there she is. Hello, Karen. I'm so excited to introduce our keynote speaker. Have I said I'm excited? I'm very excited. Karen Catlin. Karen, I'm a big fan. I love your book. I love your newsletter. I'm going to read your bio, but I did want to add a few noteworthy items. So after spending 25 years building software products and serving as a vice president of engineering at Macromedia and Adobe, Karen Catlin witnessed a sharp decline in the number of women working in tech. Frustrated but galvanized, she knew it was time to switch gears. Today, Karen is a leadership coach and a highly acclaimed author and speaker on inclusive workplaces. She coaches women to be stronger leaders and men to be better allies. Her client roster includes Airbnb, DoorDash, Google, and Intuit, as well as entrepreneurs and individuals. Karen's coaching offerings include tactics for increasing visibility, being more strategic, managing stakeholders, negotiation, and cultivating ally skills. Her writing on these and related topics has appeared on Inc., The Daily Beast, Fast Company, Forbes, and The Muse. And she's consulted on articles for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. In late 2014, Karen started the Twitter handle @BetterAllies to share simple, actionable steps that anyone could take to make their workplaces more inclusive. That Twitter handle became the inspiration for 3 books: Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces, one of my favorites, as I mentioned, The Better Allies Approach to Hiring, and I need to read that one myself, and Belonging in Healthcare, to be published in late 2022. She also emails a roundup of 5 ally actions to over 30,000 newsletter subscribers every week. So this is where I'm going to add my 2 cents. If you aren't familiar with the 5 ally actions, we share this as a resource listed on our website under education. I don't know if you knew that, Karen. You could also go directly to betterallies.com. It takes seconds to sign up, and it is amazing. Personally, I have been sharing and promoting this newsletter for, I think, over 2 years now. I pass it along to everyone I know. We use it for discussions in team meetings. Some weeks we just start email chains with a bunch of people on it, sometimes adding people that haven't been a part of prior discussions or not, and expanding our circle. They're really great. They're so good. I have to laugh at this, that though I was on maternity leave for the last 6 months, and I've returned this September to over 10,000 emails, many of which I'm just deleting. I refuse to delete your emails, Karen. I have been putting them in an archive to come back to and just slowly catching up on them, but I do not have it in me at all to delete them. I feel like I will probably miss out on a wonderful takeaway for my own allyship journey, and really there's just too much good stuff in it. So I couldn't recommend it enough. I promise Karen was not paying me for that. I'm just a huge fan, and I love this weekly email. So with that, Karen, I'll hand it over to you. And we want to thank you so much for your time today, as well as your vast influence on the subject of allyship in the workplace. Thanks.
Thank you. Amber, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. And let me just share my screen. 1 second. There we go. And just to check that you can see that. Someone can.
All good, yes.
Thank you, Amber. Wonderful. Well, Amber, I am, I don't know if it's coming through, but a little bit red-faced and embarrassed by all those kind words. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for inviting me today and that very kind introduction. You know, I'll share a little bit more about the backstory of how I came to do this work that I'm doing on Better Allies. As you heard from Amber, I did start my career in tech. I used to write code for a living as a software engineer, and over time I moved into leadership roles. And most recently, I was a vice president of engineering at Macromedia and then Adobe. And during the 25 years I spent working in tech, I did notice a decline happening in gender diversity in the industry. And I felt basically a responsibility, a role to play for women at my company to make sure they could stay there and grow their careers if that's where they wanted to be. So I started mentoring a lot of women, and delighted to hear that NAWA is also providing that kind of mentorship opportunities. It's important. So I started doing that work. I started advocating for women and representation in various meetings I was attending, and just kind of looking out for gender diversity, bringing it up as a topic. Now, over time, I love doing that advocacy work a lot more than being a vice president of engineering, I must admit. So about 10 years ago, I decided to change my career focus completely and become a leadership coach for women working in tech. Now, I still do leadership coaching today, love doing that work. But I soon realized after starting this new business, so excited about it, I soon realized I had this huge problem with my new business. The problem was, yeah, I could coach women. I think I'm a decent coach, probably could still get better there, but I could coach women on how they could be showing up differently as leaders, learning those leadership skills. But at the end of the day, to truly help my coaching clients, I needed to make their workplaces more inclusive. I needed to make sure their workplaces were meritocracies where you get ahead on your merits, on the impact you're having on the work you're doing, and not because of your gender or because of the color of your skin or because of some other aspect of your being. I wanted to make workplaces everywhere more inclusive. Now, I'm laughing at myself as I say those words, like, who am I? Like, how naive, who am I to think that I, one person, could make a difference in making more inclusive workplaces? But that naivete served me well. I powered forward and I was like, I am going to change the world. And the first thing anyone does these days when they want to change the world is they start a Twitter handle. So I started the Twitter handle @BetterAllies back in 2014, as Amber shared with you. And I started sharing what I thought were just these simple, everyday actions people could take to be more inclusive in the meetings they attended, more inclusive in the hiring committees they were a part of, more inclusive in working with customers and clients and so forth. I was just tweeting a couple times a day as things came up in on social media, and I would see problems, cautionary tales, examples of good allyship. I would amplify them. Now, this little Twitter handle started growing in popularity, and I started getting speaking requests. Come to our conference, come to our organization. Can you please speak about this whole everyday approach for being more inclusive? So I started giving talks. And every time I gave a talk, someone, I can't make this up, someone in the audience would ask, hey, Karen, this was a good talk, but we want more. Like, do you have a book? Now, the first time someone asked that question, I was like, no, I don't have a book. I just have this Twitter handle. Next time, it's like, no, sorry, no book. Next time, no book yet. And I have written 2 books. The third one's about to be published too on this topic. And I am just thrilled to be here today to be talking and sharing some of the best practices from the first book, Better Allies, with all of you. And a key message of my work is that this job of being inclusive is a job for everyone. I know we're talking to a lot of women who are underrepresented in your field today. It's a job for you. It's a job for the allies that are joining us today. It's a job for everyone, and especially not just the people who have those words, diversity, inclusion, belonging on their business card in their job title. There's a role we all can play every day. And in my talk, I'm going to be sharing some of these everyday actions with all of you. I promise you're going to take something away from this talk that you can put into practice when you get back to work after this event. So what is the first step? The first step on the ally journey literally is to get to know people who are from underrepresented groups, underrepresented based on gender or because of race or ethnicity, sexual orientation and identity, perhaps disability status, age, and so forth. We actually have to get to know people who are from these underrepresented groups in order to be better allies. And unfortunately, most of us have these things that are called just like me networks. Networks that are filled with people we like hanging out with because we have things in common with them. We kind of just jive with them. We have people who are like us in our networks. And there's research that talks about our social networks and how our social networks actually influence our professional networks. Our social networks, researchers studied it by race and found that 75% of white Americans have all white networks. Black Americans, 65% of them have all Black networks, and 46, almost half of Hispanic Americans have all Hispanic networks. So we, again, hang out with people we have something in common with. And are probably introduced to more people from that network as well. And speaking of gender, women are 5 times more likely than a man to rely on a network that is mostly women, versus men relying on a network that's mostly men. So women, we tend to have networks that are full of women that we reach out to, we tap when we need some help or advice, when we're job searching, when we are getting stuck in our careers and so forth. We have these networks that are mostly women. So I want you now to think about your professional networks. And would you say that your professional network today is very diverse? It's good, somewhat diverse, or perhaps you really could do better. And for those of you who are comfortable sharing your answer in the chat, please head over there. I love using the chat during my keynotes. So please head over and just put very diverse, somewhat, I could do better. Thank you, Sydney, for being the first person, somewhat diverse. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Now I'm seeing a lot of comments come through. This is not going to be a very data-driven poll here. I am just trying to get a sense of how people are. I love somewhat diverse and I could do better. Yeah. So what I am seeing come through here is comparable to what I see with other audiences. There are a few people who have very diverse networks. Good for you. Great. But many of you are now thinking, yeah, I think I could do better here. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. If you're still typing, keep going. I'll keep an eye on the chat. Okay, then let's talk about outside of the office, outside of work. There's research showing that men tend to hang out with male coworkers, okay, guys they work with, whether it's on the golf course or perhaps a beer after work or a virtual poker game, doesn't really matter what it is, but men are hanging out with male coworkers and strengthening those professional ties, even though it might be a very much just a social gathering, social engagement. And by contrast, women, we hang out with not coworkers, but members of our community. Perhaps it's if we are volunteering at an organization, it's people we're volunteering with. If we have young children, we're hanging out with other parents from their schools. Perhaps if we are part of a religious organization, we are doing work with that religious organization and hanging out with members of that community. So we have a nice broad network typically outside of work, but we're not strengthening those professional ties in the way that men tend to do when they are socializing. And then let's talk about this topic. I was leading a workshop in San Francisco a few years ago, and the general manager for a business unit, and his entire business unit was in this workshop, the general manager said to me, "Hey, Karen, wait a second. I was talking about diversifying our networks." And he said, "You know, my wife gets jealous when I have a work dinner with a woman coworker. How should I handle that?" Okay, well, in my head, I started thinking couples counseling, like this is not allyship. This is something you need to work through with your wife. But I didn't say those things out loud. I wanted to be respectful of my host, and also wanted to give him more of an idea of what he could be doing in the workplace. So I offered to him, I said, perhaps then you could only have breakfast meetings with coworkers of any gender. Maybe your wife wouldn't be jealous about that. Or with dinner meetings, always invite 2 or more colleagues. Again, hopefully that would help your wife get understand that this was a business meeting and not something else. Because here's the thing. For men who are in positions of power and privilege, it is their responsibility to be meeting with everyone on their staff and not excluding some people because of gender. And There's more research I'll just quickly point to about the experience of Black workers in America. There are I've read a few surveys and research reports. One survey found a number of microaggressions that Black employees reported. Small things, small slights that if they happen once, maybe not a big deal, but when they happen repeatedly, they become a big deal. The first is that I'll mention is Black employees reported a top microaggression being that their manager has met one-on-one with their team members, but not with them. I can't imagine what that might feel like to be that person and seeing the meetings that are happening and never being invited to one yourself. In another survey of just Black women in the workplace, almost 60% said they'd never had an informal interaction with a senior leader. What's that mean? Maybe seeing the senior leader in the elevator on the way up to work in the morning and them saying something like, oh, I hope you have a good day, or how was your weekend? Same kind of thing at the coffee machine, just those little small casual interactions that actually make someone more comfortable approaching that senior leader to set up a meeting for a more important topic. But almost 60% of Black women say they never have that opportunity. Okay, so I have gone through a number of issues with our networks and why they form to be these just like me networks. So what can we do about it? What are some everyday actions everyone can take to be more mindful of their network? Literally get to know colleagues who aren't like you, however you want to define that. If you work in a setting where there are new employees being hired or perhaps internal transfers going on, actually set up a coffee, virtual coffee, anything to make sure you get to know your new coworkers so that they are part of your network and feel comfortable reaching out to you and vice versa. You can also look to join employee resource groups that you're not a part of. Employee resource groups at many organizations and professional societies exist to support people who are underrepresented in their workplace, and many are open to allies. So think about joining these networks of people who you aren't a part of to listen and learn about the conversations and how you might be able to support them better and expand your network. Number 3, look to attend events for people who are underrepresented in your field, again, to listen and learn. Now, I know we have some male allies here at NAWA today, which is great. This is an example of that. You are here to listen and learn and show your support. There may be other events out there. I know in tech, there are things such as Latinas in tech or Black engineers, lesbians who tech, for example. I try to go to these so that I can understand some of the challenges people who are underrepresented in ways that I'm not are facing and what I can learn and do about it. And last but not least, we can volunteer for nonprofits in our own communities that serve underrepresented groups. Again, to pay it forward, so to speak, but diversify our network as well. Now, I'm going to pause here, and I would like to ask people, and you can share it in the chat, if there's something you would add to this slide of things we can do to diversify our network. What have you done in the past to make sure your network is diverse? Or what are you thinking, hey, here's something else I could do as a result of just thinking about this? What would you add to my slide? Everyday actions to diversify your network. Again, just go over the chat, share something if you feel comfortable. It's always a good time for me to just have a couple sips of tea. Thank you, Amanda. Ensure project teams have a diverse makeup. Yes, just actually thinking about forming a new project team. Who can we invite? Not just the people we always tap potentially. Great way to make sure that the project team is going to be effective, but also a great chance for you to get to know more people. Love that idea. Invite someone new to a project or team. Excellent, thank you. My gosh, these are great. Hire outside my age group. Set up just lightweight networking coffees. Sit with people that aren't in my department when I'm in the office. Excellent. Love these. Thank you. Okay. Become more aware of the culture of others to improve how I can relate to them. Great. bring in food from my background, my culture. Thank you. These are great. If you are still typing, keep going. I love having the dialogue continue, but at this point, I'm going to go on to our next topic. These, oh my gosh, such great ideas. The next topic I'm going to cover is our meetings and how, as allies, we should notice the non-inclusive behavior that's taking place and look to amplify and advocate people who are from underrepresented groups in the meetings we attend. First thing, I want to shine a light on our interruptions in meetings. There was a research I was reading recently about doctor-patient interactions. And when a doctor first came and talked to a patient and said something like, what are you here for today? How can I help you? Some opening question. Patient starts speaking, and the doctor listens on average for 11 seconds before interrupting and moving forward. And this survey study is just one example of the interruptions that can happen at work. Of course, we see them in professional white-collar jobs as well. I certainly have seen my fair share over my career. And when interruptions happen like this, we tend to step back from the conversation. We don't feel included. We don't feel our opinion matters, and we don't even bother trying over time, trying to speak up. And unfortunately, this is so common, more common that men interrupt women than the other way around, that sometimes this is called the man-terruption, as a little shortcut to shine a light again that men tend to be, it's just, I think, a cultural thing that they tend to feel more comfortable interrupting conversations. So women, as well as others who are underrepresented, feel less comfortable speaking up and participating in meetings. What's another thing that happens in meetings that's not inclusive? Idea hijacking. Idea hijacking. What's idea hijacking? It's when you say something in a meeting, think it's a good idea, doesn't really get picked up or go anywhere, the conversation moves on, and then someone else in the same meeting says the same thing and gets all the credit. They've hijacked your idea. Hijacked your idea. Now, this is a photo of President Obama and his staff when he was still in office. And it turns out that this idea hijacking was happening in his staff meetings. And the woman staffers had it. They started doing something called amplification. What that looked like is they would amplify each other's ideas so no one could hijack them. Hillary, great point. And here's how my department can contribute to the next steps. Okay, give Hillary a shout out, make sure that that great idea doesn't get just ignored and hijacked later on. Okay, then there's meeting housework. So again, in the chat, I'd like you to go over and share an example of meeting housework. What comes to mind when I say that phrase? Meeting housework. Thank you, Lindsay, for being first, taking notes, taking them in minutes. Malika, thank you. Sending schedulers, yes, the agenda, bringing the snacks, erasing the whiteboard, and maybe cleaning coffee mugs up at the end of the meeting, organizing the meetings to begin with, facilitating them, maybe timekeeping, bringing all the slides together for someone else maybe to present them. Yes, sending follow-up notes. Oh my gosh, these, yes, keep them coming. There are so many examples of meeting housework. Now, here's the thing about meeting housework. When we are doing these things, all these tasks that just are put here, and they're not part of our job description. I want to emphasize that. Sometimes it's someone's job to schedule meetings, to order food, to take notes. That's fine. It's not housework, then it's just your job. But when it's not part of your job and you are tasked to do it, you're basically in service of everyone else at the meeting. You're seen as a lower level than maybe you should be. And you certainly aren't participating in making some of those killer points like everyone else is, because you're a step behind taking the notes, right? So meeting housework is a huge problem for women. There was a survey run in 2 different domains. I wish it had been also done in the actuarial domain, but it was run in tech and also in advertising, that kind of Madison Avenue creative space. And almost half in tech and then 60% in the creative space of the women surveyed said that they were asked to do these lower level tasks that their male colleagues just are never asked to do. And there's another survey that found women of color are tasked with even more of this housework around the office than their white colleagues, again, holding them back from being seen as peers or at the level they should be seen at. Thank you for, I'm just checking out that chat. Keep it going. I love this conversation that's happening. One other thing I want to mention about non-inclusive behavior in meetings is credential questioning. Credential questioning. This especially happens in meetings where we're talking about talent. Maybe it's a promotion board or a interview committee to evaluate candidates. Credential questioning. This is expecting extra proof from people who are underrepresented in their field. They don't quite look the part, so we need them to prove that they really are capable. It is called prove it again bias. Now, this extra credentialing happened to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. When she was being confirmed and vetted for her current position on the Supreme Court, she was asked questions that other candidates just haven't been asked, such as, well, sure, you went to Harvard, but what was your LSAT score, your law school entrance exam score? She went to Harvard Law years ago, has had an incredible career, was a judge at that point, and people are asking about her LSAT scores, like, we're not sure you should have been there, right? Just like, why is that even coming up? So again, we can look out for this as allies when people are asking not just about an LSAT score, but, sure, you've managed a team of 3, but I'd like to make sure you really know how to be a people manager before we give you a team of 5. I think you need a couple more years of doing that. That's kind of like, prove it again that you're capable. And women of color especially have this extra credential questioning happening to them. Okay, let's move on to some ways, everyday actions we can take to amplify and advocate for people in the meetings we attend. The first is look out for those interruptions and stop them in their tracks. I bet they're happening in meetings you attend. Maybe you're doing it yourself. Maybe you're just seeing it happen. But when you do see it happen, say something, just speak up and say, hey, wait a second, I'd like to hear Emma finish what she was saying, finish her thought, to make sure that the conversation goes back to the person interrupted. Another thing we can do is to cultivate a culture of credit. And this is to get past that idea hijacking that can happen. When we hear an idea that's been hijacked, we can say something like, hey, I see you agree with what Willie said earlier, or last week when I was talking to Willie, or something like that. And of course, we can use that amplification strategy from Obama's staffers as well. Great idea, and here's how my department can contribute to next steps. Okay, meeting housework. Let's set up rotations for that meeting housework, especially for those standing meetings, those regular meetings, monthly committee meetings, weekly team meetings, whatever it might be. Let's set up rotations so that everyone takes a turn. Now, quick story on rotations, a little cautionary tale here. A few years ago, I was consulting with a tech company here in Silicon Valley, where I'm based. And I was helping them come up with a strategic plan for their women's initiative, their women's group. And I attended a meeting with the committee that led this women's group. And this was a monthly meeting. They adopted this best practice of a rotation for taking the minutes and timekeeping. So the meeting I walked into, the organizer opened her laptop and said, let me see whose turn it is today to take the minutes and be the timekeeper. And she looked through her list and she said, okay, Brian, it's your turn to take the minutes. Now, Brian was the one male ally in the steering committee for this women's initiative, right? And then Brian said, can't make this up. Brian said, I'm not that good at taking notes. I think someone else should do it. Folks, I was floored. I couldn't believe this because I know about this research that women tend to do more of this work than the men. And here it was unfolding right before my eyes. And how many of you, maybe you're cooking dinner, getting some exercise after work, falling asleep at night, you replay the day's events and you think about, when that happened, I should have said this. Yeah, happens to me all the time, maybe you as well. Well, good news. That day when Brian said he wasn't that good at taking notes, I thought of the best thing to say right then and there. And I spoke up and I said, hey, Brian, practice makes perfect. And this is the perfect place to practice. Again, there was no way I was going to let Brian get out of doing his fair share. He took the notes. It was fine. So the cautionary tale here is set up these rotations, but hold people accountable for taking their turn. And last but not least, use rubrics to evaluate talent. Remember that credential questioning I mentioned with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson? If we are in this position to evaluate talent, whether that is because a hiring committee or because we are on a promotion committee of some sort, make sure that before you start the process, everyone agrees on the rubrics of how we're going to evaluate talent. Is it because of LSAT scores or some sort of very specific scoring thing on an exam, or is it because of certain responsibility? But sort that out ahead of time. Make sure you have a really strong rubric of how you are going to evaluate it, get agreement, and then it's going to be so much more equitable when you are actually talking about talent. Okay, I'm going to pause here again and ask all of you, how have you amplified or advocated for people in meetings you attend? What would you add to my list of things here, these 4 actions? What have you done? What can you imagine doing moving forward? Thanks, Shelley. Ask people their opinions to engage them. Hey, I love that a lot. And also, a little bit of caution there too. Introverts might not know, might not be prepared to respond to something like that. So give them a heads up. Let them know you're going to be asking their opinion ahead of the meeting. Send out the agenda so people know what's there, what's on the topic, so they're ready, as opposed to just like asking them on the fly. I intentionally start or give the floor to people who don't always speak up first. Again, I would love that. Yep. Again, making sure they know that they're going to have that opportunity. I've seen a lot of the silent member, ask them a question. In a virtual environment, again, maybe you can chat them and say, hey, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. What do you think? So that it's not calling them out in a public way. Popcorn ideas, yeah, have everybody contribute in different ways, so it's not just the extroverts who are naturally going to be just speaking up. Love all these ideas. Okay, if you're typing, keep going. Brag buddies, oh my gosh, love that. Rebecca, I think I know what you're talking about there, but have people brag on your behalf, get some kind of friends, buddies who like will sing your praises, so you don't necessarily have to be doing that. And of course you can do that as well for others, return the favor. Love that idea. Okay, keep typing again. If you're typing, I'm going to go on to our next topic, make sure I can cover everything I want to cover today. So the next topic is also really important, and it's about the language we use every day and how we should be more inclusive. We could be more inclusive with many common phrases. Now, I'm going to cover about 12, I think I have 12 examples of non-inclusive behavior, just so everyone's thinking about it. And then in the everyday actions that I'll share at the end of this section, we'll talk about how we can be more systemic and mindful of the language as opposed to memorizing a huge long list. But I'm going to cover those, as I said, some examples to get started. Now, first, a little bit about me and my language. I grew up in Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island, it was very common, I think it still is, and I remember myself in high school just yelling out to friends, hey guys, let's head over to this, this store. Hey guys, let's meet here after school. Hey guys, hey guys, hey guys. I said that word a lot, thinking and meaning it in a gender neutral way. But I've since learned that many people don't think of guys being gender neutral anymore. And in fact, if you're thinking, or if you think of being in a public space and looking for a restroom as a woman or a non-binary individual, and you see this image on the door with the word guys underneath it, like, would you go into that restroom or would you look for another option? I know some of you are probably thinking, depends how urgent my need is, and I get it. but chances are you're going to look for another option. So maybe the word guys is not as inclusive. Dudes also, that's another one. People from the American South, you are lucky because y'all is such an inclusive term. You get to use that, and probably that's part of your culture and background. But there are other words that we can choose instead. I like folks myself. That's my go-to. Yeah, David, thanks. You too, folks. It's great. So anyway, let's look and be more mindful of that. Kind of friends, love that too. Lots of different versions, different alternatives. Our English language is so rich. Okay, what's another example of non-inclusive words? It's the man words that weave their way into our language. A few years ago, my daughter, who was studying computer science in college, sent me a text message one day. She said, "Hey, Mom, you're not going to believe what's at the top of my programming assignment today." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Oh, it says man up and edit the code." And she's like, "Why do I have to be a man to edit the code?" Yeah, why? Much more inclusive would be if that person who wrote that assignment simply said, "Hey, you've got this, go ahead and edit the code." So that's one example. I'm also seeing like chairman versus chairperson. Yes, we can simply, there are many things we can substitute as for man to be more inclusive of people of all different gender identities. Okay, in tech, I mentioned I am from tech. There are industry standard terms that are not inclusive that reference a terrible part of our American history. Maybe there are similar terms in your field as well, but here are two examples. We actually say this: let's use a blacklist to deny access to our trial product. We're going to blacklist that customer because they haven't paid their bills, something like that. We also say master slave a lot. The master slave architecture of the databases or of the servers is configured this way. Again, English is so rich. Why don't we say a block list if we're talking about blocking someone, as opposed to like assuming black is bad? And the corresponding white list, which is good, could be the allow list. Block list and allow list, much more inclusive. And with master slave, lots of people are now, we're choosing different terms like the main and the replica, or the parent and the child is another phrase I've used. So we can change even industry standard terms to be more inclusive. And here's one maybe that resonates with your field. Hey, they're grandfathered in to our old rates, grandfathered in. This is, again, referencing a terrible part of our history. It comes from the Jim Crow South, when really the former enslaved people, men, were given the chance to vote after the Civil War. They were able to vote. But there are many people in power who didn't want the formerly enslaved men to vote. And so they put these grandfathered rules in place, where if you had a grandfather who voted before the Civil War, yes, you can vote. And if you did not have a grandfather who voted before the Civil War, then you needed to pass a literacy test on the US Constitution and pay a small fine. So they made it more difficult for the formerly enslaved men to vote. So this phrase, though, is in our language. Oh, they're grandfathered into our old rates, our old program, whatever it might be. And so instead of saying this, because once you know it's not inclusive, it's hard not to see it. Why can't we change our language and simply say, hey, they're exempt from our increases? Something like that is a huge change and very much more inclusive. Thank you, Sydney and Sarah. I know I learn about these things all the time. It's like, wow. So we do the best we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we do better. And here's one example of that. There are also phrases in our everyday language that reference spiritual traditions for indigenous tribes here in the US and in Canada. Let's have a powwow to talk about that, just sort of like trying to be, kind of clever with our language, or maybe talking about, hey, the lowest person on the totem pole should get lunch today. Again, these are spiritual traditions terms from many indigenous tribes. And so instead of saying, let's have a powwow, a meeting, a gathering. There's so many other words. The thesaurus is full of alternatives for this. So we don't have to steal and appropriate a indigenous spiritual word. In totem pole, it's like, why don't we just say the newest hire, or the last person in the room who attended the meeting, or something like, just don't appropriate these terms. Okay, here's another one. You speak such good English. Where are you from? I hear this from many of my friends, former colleagues, and so forth, who are Asian American. I have a friend who told me this happened recently. Like, he's like, I'm from Connecticut. Where are you from? Like, it's just like, why are we assuming that someone who looks Asian, can't speak good English, couldn't possibly have the education or have learned that language or have actually been born here in the United States? Where are you from? So this statement to you, it makes them feel othered, that they stand out, that they don't look like they belong. So instead, why don't we compliment them on what they just spoke about? You delivered a compelling pitch, or you were really persuasive with the argument that you just gave in that meeting. Phyllis, I'm sorry you get that. And Malika, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Been asked this question many times. Yes. So it happens. Here we are seeing it firsthand in our audience. Let's focus on the impact of people's talking, not the othering, the fact that they look different. Okay. I think this is the last one. Let's ask for, no, I've got two more. Let's ask for preferred pronouns on the form, on the registration form, on the customer intake form, something like that. Let's ask for their preferred pronouns. Now, some of you may be thinking, hey, wait a second, Karen, isn't that good? We should be asking for pronouns because not everyone looks or uses the pronouns that they were assigned to at birth that we might think look like what they should be using. I agree. But instead of saying preferred, let's just say pronouns. That word preferred makes it sound like using them is completely optional. Maybe you prefer it, but I'll use the ones I want, right? No, just ask about pronouns. That's the best practice there. Okay, and then last but not least, this phrase. I don't think they'd be a culture fit. Maybe you've heard this in an interview committee that you've been sitting on. I just don't think they'd fit in here. I don't think they'd be a culture fit. Folks, this is code for bias, some sort of biased language that someone really doesn't want to say, hey, they're different from us. They don't remind me of my younger self, something like that. But they're not going to say that. So they focus on, I just don't think they'd be a culture fit here. Well, if you ever hear this, please speak up and say, I think they would be a culture add. They'd bring something to our culture that we don't have today, and that's going to help us deliver on our business objectives. So let's consider them what they'd be bringing that we don't have today. Okay, so what are some actions we can take? I went through a dozen examples of non-inclusive language, and again, you may have picked up one or two ideas of things you might change, but it's hard to memorize a long list. So in general, think about the language we're using and avoid terms that frankly demean people or just lightly reference painful parts of our history, like grandfathered in. Look out for that and look for alternatives. You can also look to make a Language Matters forum to discuss words and alternatives. So within your organizations, if you use Teams or perhaps Slack or something like that, or Yammer, start a discussion forum, name it something like Language Matters, and have it be a safe place where people can discuss alternatives to different language and learn about different phrases that you might be using that you don't want to use anymore. There are also inclusive language checkers. Not sure if you know about this, but there's one in Microsoft Office 365, as well as there's a Slack bot for people who use Slack. And that's information about that is on my website. But they're almost like grammar checkers where you can turn them on and it catches you and provides prompts and suggestions. So if you use Office 365, go check it out, turn it on, get used to it, start using it, and see how that can help you improve your language as well. And last but not least, you can hold a hackathon to update language. in, for example, any client templates that you might have. Instead of saying, dear sir or madam, you might say, dear colleagues. Maybe your website, your corporate website might have non-inclusive language. So a hackathon is simply a focused time, all hands on, everybody works on this, and everybody helps improve the language collectively in a short period of time so that you have a clean slate moving forward. Thank you. So I'm going to not add, if you want to add anything to this slide, I see some comments here in the chat. Keep adding to them. I love the dialogue that's happening here. But I'm going to move on and talk about our last topic, and then we'll move into Q&A. So the last thing I'll say is look to level up your ally game by sponsoring colleagues from underrepresented groups. And I'm going to go through 5 things quickly that you can do to sponsor your coworkers who are underrepresented. This isn't a big sponsorship program that maybe an organization will put in place and match people to. These are the everyday things. So what's the first one? Recommend people who are underrepresented for stretch assignments and speaking opportunities. Stretch assignments where they can learn something new, speaking opportunities where they can share a team update or something they've learned, something they are expert in. These are like rocket booster fuel for a career because they give you visibility in ways that other opportunities just don't. And visibility is often a key thing to career growth. So as an ally, look to recommend people to do these activities. You can also look to endorse them publicly. Many ways to endorse people publicly, but here's one. Happened to me. I mentioned I was at Adobe. When I first joined Adobe, I remember being in a large engineering leadership meeting, and my boss, my supervisor, was a senior vice president, and he was in that meeting, and I heard him say, well, what I learned from Karen Catlin is the following. He went on to summarize something I had shared with him probably the previous week in our one-on-one meeting. But the fact that he said he had learned something from me made me feel great in the moment. But I think it helped me build credibility with all my new peers who are all men, credibility that was going to help me then start working with them on sort of cross-department initiatives and so forth that I needed their support and help on. So that's just one example of how we can endorse someone publicly, small thing, everyday thing, share something we learned from them in a public way, and help them build credibility. We can also look to share career goals with decision makers. As we're getting to know new colleagues who are joining our teams, new coworkers who are from underrepresented groups, remember back on our networking discussion, we can also ask about what their career goals are. Is it to get to that next level? Is it to work on a bigger client project? Is it to travel internationally on behalf of the firm? Whatever it is, find out what their goals are and see if you can't connect the dots. Number 4, invite them to high-profile meetings. High-profile meetings might be a strategic planning session for the coming year. A high-profile meeting may be a meeting with a very important potential client. It may be dinner with a newly hired, very important person at your firm. There are all sorts of different high-profile meetings. And people who are underrepresented often don't have the opportunity to attend these. They don't get to diversify their network by attending. They don't get to see what happens kind of behind the scenes in these meetings. So invite people as you can to these high profile meetings. And last but not least, speak their name when they aren't around. I learned about this from Carla Harris. And Carla Harris is a senior leader at Morgan Stanley. And she has a fabulous TED Talk. I think it's been viewed like over 4 million times. And she talks about meritocracy, or actually the myth thereof. She talks about how most people in their career think if I stay heads down, do my work, I will get ahead. And she busts that myth. And she shares like, that's important to do, but to really get ahead in your career, you need to have someone who is speaking your name, singing your praises in the rooms that you aren't even in. So as an ally, let's look to do that for people who are underrepresented. Get to know their work, so that we can sing their praises in the rooms that we are in the meetings we're in, so that they get a fairer shot, a more equitable shot at getting ahead in their own career. Okay, and with that, I just want to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for the participation in the chat. I love this. I've barely scratched the surface, though, so I do encourage you to read my books. Join the NAWA book club that's coming up, too, a great way to talk about this book and with your colleagues and learn together. I love that you're doing that. Thank you. So I encourage you to read my book. As Amber was sharing at the beginning, I do have this free weekly newsletter called 5 Ally Actions. Please sign up if you're not already part of that community. It's basically a roundup of things I've learned during the course of the week about how to be a better ally. And I also share the mistakes I make, because that's part of being an ally too, is we're going to make mistakes. This is hard topic at times to discuss, to cover, to know how to show up. I make mistakes. I share them in my newsletter so that we can all learn together. And I'm also on social media. That Twitter handle I started back in 2014 at Better Allies, but also Instagram. And I have a blog on Medium where I share my newsletters as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone. And Amber, I think you are going to help me moderate the Q&A now, but I hope people have some questions for me. We have, I think, about 10 more minutes before we have to wrap this section up. So Amber, I'm going to stop sharing and.
Sounds good. I think we're both pinned. I think Sandy has that all set up. So if you're on speaker view, hopefully you see both of us. But that was fabulous. Thank you, Karen. I know I'm learning new things every time I read your stuff and this as well.
Thank you.
So what questions do we have? Do you feel free to drop it in the chat, or if people want to come off of mute, that's fine as well. I interrupted you, Karen.
No, and I'm say I lost my cursor. Things happen, so I can't actually stop sharing. So if we'll just have that up there, and hopefully people can see us both.
Sounds good. All right, we have one coming through from Emily Pastor. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. What are good ways to get our DE&I teams more aware of initiatives like these? Should it just be us bringing it up to them?
I'm not sure. Emily, please elaborate a little bit. Initiatives like these, you mean all these ally actions, like how to be better allies? Is that what you mean? Or is it something else? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Emily, thank you for asking wording changes and so forth. So one thing you could consider doing is hosting a Better Allies book club with DEI teams in your organization. And whether it is the wording changes to embrace, or if it's something else that is important to your culture that you want to be changing to be more inclusive, starting with reading my book could be, I don't mean to be so self-serving, but I wrote this to help with exactly that, is to raise awareness and give people ideas for actions. So that's one thing I would suggest, is to start a book club or get people to read my newsletter. I cover language, for example, quite frequently as things come up. And yeah, so those are two ideas.
Great. All right, we have one from Sandy Lowe. What's the best way to ask someone how to pronounce their name if you aren't confident? Don't want to make anyone feel othered, but also want to be respectful and pronounce their name correctly.
Yeah, I think simply saying, and it's such a great question, simply saying, hey, I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly. Can you say it for me? I think that's just a fine, respectful way. And you're not saying, oh, I've never seen a name like that, or making up some, kind of excuse of why you can't pronounce the name. Just ask them. There's also something I have done in my email signature, is I have a recording to how to pronounce my name. It's called namedrop.io, and it's a simple little free tool that you can record your name, get a link to it, and you can pop it into your email signature, so that I think my name's easy to pronounce, but not for everyone. And so I want to normalize that. Here's a resource that you can go to learn how to pronounce my name and have other people do that as well.
great. I actually really appreciated it too. And when I was getting your bio, I used that. That was wonderful. From David Turn, we have, can you talk about the importance of modeling behavior as an ally, particularly if you are higher up in the organization?
Yeah. Well, David, you've said it very well, I think, in your question. It is important for people to model behavior as an ally. We all kind of, good behavior. There's a ripple effect. How do I want to say this? There's a ripple effect that can happen, especially when someone in leadership starts acting in a certain way, starts demonstrating certain values and behavior. There's a ripple effect where people want to mimic that. They want to be like that person, and they start modeling that behavior too. And one example, someone recently, I was reading about this, just the power of, if someone uses a term or says something, I covered this in my newsletter recently. It's like, yeah, the higher ups were getting restless, something like that. That's why they want us to work on this project. When you respond to something like that, you can simply model better language yourself and say, yeah, I know that our executive team is concerned about this project. Just model better behavior yourself, better language yourself, and it can really have an impact. So I really believe that a single act can have a ripple effect where a lot of people start mimicking you, and the higher up you are, the more powerful that's going to be, because people are looking to you for how to be showing up and taking cues from you.
That's great. From Sarah Manuel, she's also a moderator for our next session. Do you have any advice for bringing these topics up with people who aren't aware of their biases? For example, I don't see color, and how power dynamics may come into play with organizational hierarchy.
Yeah. My favorite go-to approach to bring this up to someone who may not be aware of a bias that they have is to use this thing called seek common ground and then educate. Seek common ground. I used to think it was okay to say that. I used to think it was okay to do this thing. I used to think that was funny. I used to. Okay, that's the common ground. But I have since learned, and you share what you've learned about that bias, that topic that might be discriminatory. And you don't do it in a shame and blame kind of way. It's more like, hey, I used to be in the same shoes you were. Now this is what I've learned. And hopefully bring them along with you on the journey to be a better ally. So that's my favorite topic. Now, yeah, power dynamics. You can use that, of course, if someone is much more senior than you. Use that approach. It can be a very respectful way to do it, whether it's someone who's your peer or a supervisor or a skip level. But I get it. Sometimes the power dynamics are really intense. And of course, you want to be treading with caution, I'll call it, when you are pointing out behavior that someone above you is doing that you think is not appropriate, is not inclusive. So the power dynamics at your firm and within your groups and so forth. Be aware of them. If you ever feel like I'm not in the position to call that out, to talk to that person about it, maybe you could ask one of their peers to do it and see if they have been noticing the same behavior and would be willing to have a conversation about it with that person, so that you kind of get it more out of your court and into somebody else's.
I like the peer suggestion. That's good. Fear of the unknown is one of the many barriers preventing allies from speaking up in uncomfortable situations. This is from LaShawn Harris. What are some ways we can break through this barrier?
Yeah. Fear of the unknown. Yeah. LaShawn, thank you for asking this. And I'm thinking of so many different scenarios right now as I'm just putting myself in the situation there of I've had fear of the unknown, being uncomfortable. So there are some things that we can do if we don't know what to say. We can say something like, ouch. Someone says a joke or makes a comment or does something not inclusive. We can simply speak up and say, in the moment, ouch. Ouch buys us some time. It buys us time to maybe think about what we might want to say next. And it also calls attention to, like, this does not feel comfortable. even though you might not know what to say next. And frankly, I personally, with the work I do, I would own it. It's like, ouch, not really sure what's going on here, but something does not feel right to me, something along those lines, to just admit that I don't know everything, but there's something wrong here. When I see non-inclusive behavior and I don't know what to say. There are also things we can do, especially in person. We can do things such as we can, if it's a meeting, we can maybe make sure we're focusing on the person who is interrupted over and over again, just focusing on them as though we want to hear more from them. We can use our body language. We move closer to someone who might be being harassed to just show our solidarity. Gosh, I'm trying to think of one more thing, LaShawn, to help in this situation. Simply if we hear something that's we don't think is inclusive, but we're not really sure, again, what else to say. I mentioned ouch, but we can also say, ask a question like, what makes you say that? What makes you say that? Being curious about why someone has maybe just said or done something. What makes you do that? What makes you feel that way? Helps us broach the conversation, learn a little bit more, and hopefully be able to have a dialogue, even though we might not have all of the words ready to talk about it. So LaShawn, I hope that helps answer your question. Yeah, it's a big one.
I actually find myself using that a lot, taking that from your book, The Why, and it works really well. The what makes you say that, the why do you say that? It's only backfired once, and that was with my grandmother, and I don't think we should go there.
Okay.
But we are out of time here. Karen, I had a question for you. I might just secretly email you.
Sounds
but
good.
really appreciate all your time here and all your insight on this topic and everything you're doing to influence being an ally and helping us on our allyship journey.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for hosting me today. It's been just a pleasure.
Thank you.